Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name's Kit, and this is my world. Thank you very much for joining me. In this episode, I'm going to be doing another tag. I was tagged by Shawn the Book Maniac. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time he tagged me, but since he tagged me on this tag, he's created another tag in which he's also tagged me. For which I'm extremely grateful, very flattered and honoured, etc. However, I'm not going to be doing the second tag, and I don't want Shawn or anyone else to be offended by that decision. It's basically simply that I can't do it. The tag asks me to come up with 10 books that I'd like to read as some sort of bucket list. I can't do that. I'm a mood reader. I'm so much of a mood reader that I can't even do a standard TBR, let alone a 10-book bucket list. It just doesn't work. It's not the way I read. So it would be disingenuous of me to do Shawn's second tag, in which he's tagged me, and for that I apologise. But I am going to do this one. This one isn't by Shawn, it's by Daniela at Only If For a Page. Obviously, I will leave a link to both of these channels in the description. And this tag is the Contradictions book tag. And without further ado, let's get cracking. Question number 1. I love this genre, but I didn't like this book. I'm going to say The Redemption of Alphalus by David and Lee Eddings. Now, my history with Eddings is complicated because I was a huge fan of the Belgariad and the Malloreon, and also the accompanying autobiographies that went with them, and the Revan Codex, which is kind of an encyclopedia. All of that stuff I loved back in the day when I was a little bit less sophisticated than I am now. So I kind of grew out of the Eddings books a while back. However, before I even discovered BookTube, I attempted to do a review of the Eddings books just because I knew them so well and had such fond memories of them. So I made a video about the Eddings books that I liked, the Belgariad and the Malloreon. And it is, to date, my by far most successful video. It's got over 200 billion views or something. I can't remember the exact figure. I might have exaggerated that number slightly. But it's done very, very well. People are still watching it. People are still responding to it. People are still commenting. And in a way, I feel a little bit uncomfortable and embarrassed by that because I haven't really read those books for years. I kind of grew out of them. And after having made that video, I discovered all sorts of very unpleasant things about David and Lee Eddings, which make me even more uncomfortable about the whole Eddings thing. So, with all of that backstory in mind, I have absolutely no discomfort at all in saying that The Redemption of Alphalus was shit. It was 913 pages of smegma sauce, and I can't remember anything about it at all, except that it taught me to hate the word pantheon. So The Redemption of Alphalus is definitely part of a genre that I love. It's fantasy, high fantasy, my favourite kind of fantasy. I really hated the book. Question number 2. I rarely read this genre, but I loved this book. This is an easy one. It's Maggies Grave. This is unquestionably horror, but it's not horror as I knew it. I kind of assumed horror was either Bram Stoker type horror or Mary Shelley gothic horror, or Stephen King type horror, and I've tried reading both of those kinds of thing and not really enjoyed it very much. But Maggies Grave, wow! I was very excited by Maggies Grave. I absolutely loved it. It was very modern. It was very fresh. It was filthy. It was disgusting. It was just totally gruesome and obscene. And because of that, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I like books to be grown up and uncensored. And this was both of those things. and more. You can see my review of Maggies Grave in a recent video that I made. If you can get through the, 3 hours or whatever it is of driving footage, eventually there is a review at the end of that video. And it's not a bad one, if I do say so myself. So please, help my algorithm statistics and watch my review of Maggies Grave. Moving on. Question number 3. I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. Well, I like whodunits with a bumbling detective. I don't know whether that counts as a trope or whether that's a subgenre. I'm not exactly sure, but I like the whole whodunit thing where there are lots of characters and every one of them could be a potential suspect, and I like the fact that the person solving the crime is a kind of seemingly bumbling detective. Agatha Christie type stuff, I like that. However, I did not enjoy Holding by Graham Norton. I thought I would, I certainly like Graham Norton, but honestly, I found Holding just boring and also kind of annoying because it was jumping in and out of the different characters in a way that I found uncomfortable as a reader. So I'm going to say Holding by Graham Norton. Question number 4. I hate this trope, but I loved this book. Well, this is a trope that I really do hate. It's fantasy creatures in a real world / modern world / modern city setting. Things like Godzilla trampling through cities with people screaming in the foreground. I know that's a movie, but stuff that does that kind of thing. Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. I've only seen the film, I haven't read the book, but I suspect there was a book. And did it involve dinosaurs in the modern city? Was it Seattle? No, it wasn't Seattle. It began with an S, though. San Diego. It was San Diego. I'm pretty sure San Diego, California, there were dinosaurs rampaging through the streets. And if not in that book or that movie or whatever, at some point in the Jurassic Park universe that has happened. I don't like it. Fantasy creatures in a real world setting or a modern setting or a city setting, it just doesn't work for me. However, The Borrables by Michael de Larrabiti, a trilogy of books which I bang on about endlessly because I love them so much. These include fantasy creatures in a modern city setting. London of the modern day, or at least the modern day at the time the books were written. Borrables are mythological creatures. They are eternal. They look like children, but they never grow old. They never grow up. They don't die unless they're killed violently. They have pointy ears and kind of powers in terms of not really powers, but they're very good at parkour, and they're super intelligent and very, very clever and cunning and resourceful. So those are kind of fantasy creatures, but the ones that are definitely unequivocally fantasy creatures are the Rumbles, which are the Borrables' arch enemies. You only meet the Rumbles in the first book. After that, the enemies are the police. But in the first book, the enemies are the Rumbles, and they're giant rat-like creatures with long snouts and fangs, and they can't pronounce their R's. Just like Jonathan Ross. Most of you won't know who he is. Anyway, so the Borrables is the exception to that rule. Question number 5. I love this author, but I didn't like this book. I have a couple of answers here. The first one, Arthur Ransom. I absolutely love Arthur Ransom. He was a very, very good author. He had a brilliant turn of phrase. His books are just exquisitely well written. However, 2 of the books in my beloved Swallows and Amazons series are absolute pants. They're poo, they're toffee, they're abysmal. I loathe them. There are actually 2 that are popular favourites amongst many of Ransom's fans, but I hate Peter Duck. I passionately hate Peter Duck. I despise him and the book that he stars in. And also Missy Lee. I hate Missy Lee as well. Those 2 books, Peter Duck and Missy Lee, are both meta books in the Ransom universe, and I see absolutely no point in doing meta within the Ransom universe. The kids have real-world adventures. They don't need to be making shit up, and making whole books out of that made-up stuff just seems pointless, a waste of time, and it's annoying. I hate meta. Did I mention I hate meta? Anyway, moving on. Question number 6. I previously disliked a book by this author, but I loved this book. Well, I'm going to mention Bill Bryson again. I'm sorry to have to do that. But back in the day, before I knew who Bryson was, I used to love travelling. I still do, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I used to go to Amsterdam quite a lot. It was what I considered at the time to be a very exciting city. And Bill Bryson wrote about Amsterdam in a book called, I think, Neither Here Nor There. I believe it was his first travel book, and it's kind of primitive by Bryson standards. Anyway, I hated it, and I hated his description of Amsterdam. I found it to be nothing at all like the city that I was at the time in love with. So I decided that I hated Bryson and I hated his book, and I never wanted anything to do with him ever again. Flash forward a few years, and I was working on ferry boats as a giant mouse. Some of you, if you've been with the channel for a while, might be familiar with this story, so I apologise, but if you're new around here, one of the many jobs I have done in the past is working as Jerry. As in Tom and Jerry. I had a partner who was taller than me, who was Tom. I was Jerry. I was dressed up as a giant mouse with a great big gigantic fiberglass mouse head. And my job on the ferry boats was to entertain the children during the crossing and keep them away from their parents, who were busily getting drunk and fighting. So I would get beaten up by these adorable children in my mouse suit and had a thoroughly miserable time doing it. And so I would read as a way of escaping. Every time I got an opportunity to have a break, I would take my head off, as it were, and read. And so I ploughed through many, many books during the time that I was doing this job. For 3 summers, I think it was. Anyway, one of the many books that I discovered, one of the many authors that I discovered during my time as a seafaring mouse was A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I picked it up off the shelf in the onboard bookshop on the ferry and read the blurb at the back. It seemed exciting, adventurous and witty, so I bought it. And I had no idea at all that I was reading a book by the same author who a few years earlier had offended me so terribly with his description of Amsterdam. So I completely fell in love with the book, I fell in love with Bryson, and it is an affair that has continued to this day, because I continue to be Bryson's #1 fan. In the scariest way possible, and I love all his books, apart from that one. Question number 7. I love this cover, but I didn't like this book. Well, I've mentioned this before. In fact, I think I mentioned it in my last tag, so I'm not going to talk about it at all. I'm just going to say Every Heart a Doorway by Shawn Maguire. I hated the book. I thought it was shit, but the cover is really nice. It's kind of a magical doorway in the middle of a wood, and it's mysterious and magical and slightly ethereal. And I think it's the sort of thing A.J. Dunn might quite like as well. It's a very evocative cover, very mysterious, and it's just a shame that the words contained within the book don't live up to the cover. Moving on, question number 8. I don't like this cover, but I loved this book. Well, I'm going to mention all of the Swallows and Amazons books. Now, of course, there have been many different cover designs over the years, but I don't particularly like any of them. I prefer the ones that are just a single picture of Arthur Ransom's own hand-drawn illustrations coloured in. Those ones are okay, but the terrible ones are some of the more modern ones by other artists. I'll try and put a few examples up for you to have a look at. But also, I really hate the early hardback covers, which do feature Arthur Ransom's own hand-drawn illustrations, but it's too many of them. It's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different pictures that are individual illustrations by Ransom, but all put clumpily into like a sort of weird montage. I don't like the montaginess of it and the messiness of it, and they're just, it's too much. It's sensory overload. I don't like it. And on that note, I think I'll call it a day. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you haven't already, you know what to do. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share, comment, do all the good stuff, and I will see you next time. See you later.